Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are once again talking about War Thunder, and this time we're talking about a suggestion which was passed to the developers in November of 2020. This is the independent Yugoslavian aviation tech tree, and the reason why it's taken me so long to be able to get to this one is, well, first of all, it came out at a time where there was a lot of stuff going on in War Thunder, and also this one required a decent amount of research to understand all of the vehicles and what's going on. The post was made by Epic Blitzkrieg 87, and it had a ton of different people who were working on it, which is pretty cool. Now, there was two ways of being able to present this. One of the ways was do it by ranks and, go through rank 1, 2, 3, and 4, but instead I've decided to go from basically manufacturer or basically type. So this one, we're going to be talking about the other section, which is foreign aircraft which the Yugoslavs used, and also, some very interesting machines as we go along. This series will probably be maybe 3 parts to get through all of this. It is a large tech tree, there's a lot of stuff, and there will be a link in the description to it, so if you want to have a look at it yourself, make sure to do so. The first thing that I want to get out of the way is a designation system. So obviously every country has a different designation system. The Yugoslav Air Force is no different. So they use many prefixes. L equals fighter, J equals attack, H equals helicopter, V equals utility, N is for training, and T is for transport. There was a bunch of other ones as well, but those are the main ones, just to give you an idea. So if you see something which starts with an L, such as an L-12, that is a fighter, and it also refers to the MiG-21 F-13. So let's get started having a look at all of these wonderful vehicles. The first one is the Caproni Bulgarski KB-11A or 11A. This is a Bulgarian machine, and basically it was used in the 1940s and was used as a utility monoplane built by Caproni Bulgarski, and it was a subsidiary of the Italian aviation conglomerate Società Italiana Caproni. And what this is, it's a very simple plane. It has a decent engine in it, the PZL Pegasus 21 radial, which has 1120 horsepower. It also was armed with two 7.92mm machine guns. Also had 6 hardpoints on it and could carry 2 100-kilo bombs, or 4 50 bombs, or 6 25 bombs. It was used by Yugoslavia. 30 examples were sent by Bulgaria as war reparations, which were then Yugoslavian modified and upgraded to increase their service life until the late 50s. So this was used for a long time. The next one on offer is the LVT-1, and this one is a very interesting one, but unfortunately there doesn't seem to be any pictures of it. This is a Yugoslavian Hurricane. Yes, they did use Hurricanes, but this one actually has a German DB601 engine in it. The DB601 was heavily used by the Germans during the Second World War. It was one of the early engines from Daimler-Benz, and you can find it on early variants of the BF-110s, the BF-109s, and many others. So this is very, very close to that Spitfire that we know about, which had the DB engine in it as well, but this was a Yugoslavian version, which is pretty cool. But as I said, unfortunately, there is no pictures. Hopefully, at some point, somebody could find one. The next one is the Fiesla FI-167A-0, and this is probably best described as a German version of the Swordfish. Its first flight was in 1937, and it was produced between 38 and 40. This was a German biplane, torpedo, and reconnaissance bomber, and it was mainly used on the Graf Zeppelin class aircraft carriers, which were under construction from 36 to 42. Now, I think that's pretty awesome. It would be nice to have more of these machines in the game. It was powered by a Daimler-Benz DB601B, which gave it 1100 horsepower, and also it was able to carry one 1000-kilo bomb, one 765-kilo torpedo, one 500-kilo bomb, or 4 50s on top of that as well. It also had a fixed firing forward mounted 7.92mm and also had a 1.7.92mm MG15 in the rear cockpit, which had 600 rounds. The next vehicle is the Dornier DOY, and this is a low-tier bomber, which is from the early 30s. This machine was specifically designed for Yugoslavia, and only for Yugoslavia. There was only 4 of them actually used, and it was designed by Dornier Flugzeugwerk, and basically, it's a pretty interesting machine. It actually has 3 engines on it, and the engines that it has are 3 Gnome-Rhone 9Ks, which are 9-cylinder air-cooled radial piston engines. They all had 600 horsepower each, totaling 1800 horsepower overall, with 3 bladed metal propellers. What's interesting about this thing is it actually has 5 machine guns for defense on it, 1 in the nose, dorsal and also ventral positions of the aircraft, and it was able to carry 12 100-kilo bombs. So this would definitely be a low-tier machine, but I think overall it's a unique design. I've always been a fan of machines with the 3-engine design, especially one on top, and it is lovely to see. The next one is the Dornier DOD, and the Dornier DOD was like the Dornier DOY, but this was designed specifically for Yugoslavia again, but there were 2 other nations which did use it. Japan got 1 of them, and the Luftwaffe, obviously for Germany, was able to get 3. There were 29 built overall, which meant that 24 of them went to Yugoslavia. You can see that this is more of a flying boat or a boat plane instead of anything else. The next vehicle which is on offer is the Dornier DO22KJ, and this was another one which wasn't actually used by the Luftwaffe, even though it was built by the Germans. It was used by Greece and Yugoslavia, the DO22KJ for Yugoslavia, and the KG, which was used for Greece. There was other variants of this machine which also existed. There was about 30 of them that were around. The main machine was a German seaplane developed in the 30s, and basically it was just used for general reconnaissance stuff, with a few prototypes made as well. It was armed with 2 7.92mm machine guns in ventral and dorsal positions, and then it had 1 7.92 in the nose as well, and it could carry up to 1 800-kilo torpedo or 4 50-kilo bombs. So this would have been primarily a naval attacker / reconnaissance aircraft. The next vehicle is the Dornier DO17 KB1, the KB2, and also the KB3. So basically the DO17, which I believe we do have in game in the German tech tree. These ones are different though from Yugoslavia. Basically, Yugoslavia ordered DO17s from Germany, but they weren't complete, so Yugoslavia approached France for a number of Gnome-Rhone engines, and after fitting the DO17 with the French engines, it was designated the DO17 KB2, and it achieved a top speed of 420 kilometers an hour, which was not satisfying for them. So trials were conducted with Italian power plants, and those became the DO17 KB3s. There was only one complete German DO17, which was the DO17K, and this machine was armed with a 20mm Hispano Mark II in the nose, one 13.2mm Browning as the front gunner, and one 7.9mm Browning in the back. It was able to carry 8 106-kilo bombs and 2 200s or 2 200s as well. The next one is of Italian origin, and this is the Capronis, the CA310s, and also the CA310 Bisses. These machines were Italian of origin, and they were basically a twin-engine reconnaissance aircraft which was used in World War II. This one was used by a lot of people. It was used by the Italians, the Hungarians, the Norwegians even got a few, and also even the Air Force of Peru were able to get some. Basically, there were a bunch of different variants of the CA3 series, but these ones, the 310, was the twin-engine reconnaissance version. It had two Piaggio Stella P7 C1635 7-cylinder radial piston engines, whereas the BIS was basically a prototype of the CA311, and it had upgraded engines and also an unstepped all-glazed nose. The upgraded engines were the Piaggio Stella P7 C35 engines, and as I said, this thing was used by a ton of different people. It was definitely one which was farmed about the place. The maximum speed was only about 365 kilometers an hour. The engines themselves, at least on the standard version of them, the only had 470 horsepower each, so totaling not a lot. What's that, 940, I believe. And then the armament, it had three 7.7mm Breda Safat machine guns, which had two fixed forward firing ones in the wing roots, and also one dorsal turret. It also could carry up to a 450 kilo set of bombs, but obviously, as I said, this machine was mainly a reconnaissance aircraft. The next one you'll all be familiar with. This is the Ilyushin IL-2M3. This is obviously found in the USSR tech tree, and there was more than 200 which was used by the SFR of Yugoslavia until the mid-50s. So this was a machine which was used a hell of a lot when it comes to their air force. Then we have some American origins. We have the Republic P-47D-40RE. This was seen as the best D variant of the vehicle. It was used by Yugoslavia until the early 50s. Once again, over 100 of these were used. It had a bubble canopy. It was able to have more ordnance options, and also to be able to carry 10 HVAR rockets. It had a slightly better engine than its predecessors as well, which is why it was used for so long. Then, the next one, British time, we have the de Havilland DH-98 Mosquito FB6. This one should be the same as the FB6 that we have in-game, the fighter-bomber variant of the Mosquito, and this was used until the early 50s, once again, by Yugoslavia. Some more British stuff as well. They also operated the Supermarine Spitfire Mark 5B and also Mark 5C, the S352. And this machine is obviously a pretty cool one. I always am a fan of the Spitfires, and these would be seen as premiums, by the way, when it comes to the tech tree. The next one as well is another Spitfire. The Spitfire Mark 9 also makes a return to another country, once again used by Yugoslavia. So there it would be. And then once again back to some Italians. We have the Savoia Marchetti, the SM79K. Now the SM79K is very much an interesting machine. The SM79K is a specific variant which was built for Yugoslavia, and I have like a little bit of I'm not sure which one is true here. It might be the fact that the pictures are just wrong, but basically this version was based on the SM79JR, and it talks about, at least in the forum post, that the pictures that he used are from Soviet aircrew with the former Yugoslav Royal Air Force Marchetti's SM-79K bomber that escaped the Soviet Union. But the SM-79K, if it's based on the SM-79JR, the SM-79JR was a twin-engine version which was used by Romania. It used two UMO 211DA engines, and I'm not sure where that comes in, whether this is a different version or whether they were all just called the SM-79K, even if they were different from each other. But yeah, there's a little bit of confusion, at least for me. Then we have a B-17. Yes, the B-17 G50DL. This also makes its appearance, and this one has kind of an interesting story. So this one was damaged by ground fire over Vienna and emergency landed at Somba Airfield, Yugoslavia, on the 20th of March 1945. The crew returned home on April the 5th, but the airplane was interned by Yugoslavs, repaired, and markings were repainted. Finally, it was recaptured by the Soviets, together with many other airplanes. So this vehicle was obviously used by the Americans. They had to emergency land, and then it was basically captured, I suppose is the way to put it. So then the F-84 G-16RE, this was once again used by Yugoslavia in the early 50s. They purchased more than 200 of the G-16REs. This one seems to get farmed out by to pretty much every country from America, so it's also nice to see it here. And then we have a really interesting one. This is the F-86E-10 Sabre. Now, the F-86E-10 Sabre, which was used by Yugoslavia, was actually two F-86s combined together, which is a really interesting concept. So basically, this thing has the airframe of the F-86F, but it also has the engine of the A5. So there was about 120 of these were acquired in 1956, and they were mixed with the already useful CL-13 Mark IVs that Yugoslavia were using. So the fact that you have two planes which were spliced together here, I actually find that really cool. Then, of course, the Sabre Dog. You know, no country would be complete without the F-86D, and Yugoslavia is no different. They use the Sabre Dog as well. And then we go on to the Sukhoi, so the Su-25UB, getting into some more modern vehicles. Now, the UB variant of the Su-25 is actually a trainer variant. It was drawn up in 1977. The first prototype of it was called the T-8UB-1. It was rolled out in July of 1985, and its maiden flight was carried out at the Ulan Ud factory airfield on the 12th of August of that year. And by the end of 1986, 25 of the Su-25UBs had been produced at Ulan Ud before the twin-seater completed its state trials and officially cleared for service with the Soviet Union. And it was intended for training and evaluation flights of active duty pilots and for training pilot cadets at the Soviet Air Force flying schools. The performance did not differ substantially from the single-seater variant. The navigation, attack, and sighting devices and weapons control systems of the two-seater enabled it to be both used for both routine training and also weapons training missions. So even though this was a trainer variant, it could be armed to the teeth with everything a standard variant would be. Then we have the L-12. The L-12 is just a Migoyan Gurevich MiG-21 F-13. This vehicle would be pretty much the same as the variants that you see in the USSR territory right now. And then we also have the L-14. The L-14 is based off the MiG-21 PFM. It is known as the MiG-21R, and it was basically a tactical reconnaissance variant and the first Soviet jet to use ELINT equipment. And its engine was later replaced with the more powerful Tumansky R-13-300, and also it would be able to carry many different types of armament, such as R3Ss and also RS-2USs, and had a pretty cool radar as well. And there was a bunch of other machines that, you know, the Yugoslavs used. You know, they used the L-14, which was the MiG-21 PFM. You know, the L-13 was technically the Sabre Dog, and then the L-15 was the MiG-21M. Then also you have another MiG-21. This is the MiG-21 Bis-D, the Doroden as it's known, and this basically was a Croatian modified MiG-21 Bis, which was modified to be part of NATO standards. It received its own unique avionics package to meet the requirements of NATO. And then the next one is you have Krize's Yak 3. Now, I couldn't find anything on Krize, even though he has a really interesting name, but obviously the Yugoslavs did use the Yak 3s. They used them all the way from 44 to 45. And basically, the first 3 Yak 3s reached Yugoslav Aviation late 1944, still wearing the markings of the Soviet Air Force. They were used on the Shrem front, flown mainly by commanding officers of the 112th and 113th Fighter Regiments, Sava Polyanek and also Milyenko Lipovzhak. And to the end of 1945, there were received 68 planes, and these were used by the 11th Air Fighter Division. And I'm guessing that this one, Krize's Yak 3, is a specific one. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any information on it. Maybe I'm just looking in the wrong places. The next version is, or the next vehicle, is the Messerschmitt Bf-109 G2-9663. Now, this is a very specific Bf-109 G2, and the reason for that is because it had a bunch of different modifications done to it, not just by Yugoslavia, but also Bulgaria and Germany. The performance and aerodynamics were changed, although it isn't specified how they were changed, but it did retain the 2 7.92mm machine guns and also the MG151 cannon. So this vehicle, it's very hard to find information, or at least it seems to be, on it, but at least it is kind of an interesting one. Might be slightly different to fly compared to other Bf-109s. The next vehicle is the Hawker Hurricane Mark II-C. This, we already have in game, and it was once again used in World War II. And then we have the Fallen Gnat, which is a British-designed small and lightweight jet fighter, not supersonic, but pretty close. And it had a really good climb rate, and it was exported to Yugoslavia, and with its export it was armed with 2 Aden Mark IV cannons, which had 115 rounds per gun. This one I hope we see in the British tech tree at some point, the good old Fallen Gnat, the F1. Maybe we see it in this tech tree instead if it comes to the game, who knows. Then we have the L-15. The L-15 is a MiG-21 MF, but it's an older version of it. Its top heat seeker was the R-13M, but it could also utilize the R-3S. The R-3R SARH missile was not included for it, and the radar was switched from an RP-22SM to an RP-21MA, both to meet export standards. It did have a built-in 23mm GSH-23 with 200 rounds though, and Yugoslav purchased 24 of these, and it is an exclusive export MiG-21 model which the USSR never operated. The next vehicles are the Potez 630 and the 631. These are obviously the French vehicles, the twin-engine aircraft, which I believe we have the 630s in game. Not entirely sure if we have the 631, but basically these vehicles were, twin-engined fighter/attacker variants, depending on which variant was picked up, and they were used by a ton of different countries, including, obviously, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, with some fixed 7.5mm and also some flexible 7.5mm. I'm sure it would have had a little bit of damage behind it, and also Yugoslavia ordered 2 630 C3s and 1 631 C3 as well. So those are the vehicles that they operated. The next one is Zamaj Hurricane Mark I, and this is actually an interesting beast because we do have a ton of Hurricanes in the game, but they're all Mark II variants. They're not Mark I variants. Mark I variants of the Hurricane, just like the early versions of the Spitfire, actually have a really interesting story, which hopefully at some point will be told when it comes to War Thunder. But basically, between 1938 and 41, the Royal Yugoslav Air Force received 24 British Hawker Hurricane Mark I aircraft. 20 more were built under license by Zamaj, and the Hurricane Mark I isn't actually in the game yet, only the Mark II variants and later variants as well, such as the Mark IV. Basically, the Mark I is the first production variant of the Hurricane. It had fabric-covered wings, a wooden twin two-bladed fixed pitch propeller, or it had a 3-blade 2-pitch propeller. Now, looking at the images that I've seen, I believe the Yugoslav one had access to the 2-bladed propeller. It was also powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin Mark II or Mark III engines, depending on which one that you, depending on which batch you look at, basically. Like the Hurricane Mark I had 2 batches, which is why some of them had the 2-blade, some of them had the 3-blade, some of them had the more powerful engine. It would have been much better to actually just split them with, you know, different names, but hey ho, we're British and this is how we do things. And just to add complications to it, there is also a Mark I revised. so if you aren't confused now, it is best, you know, as I said, I might do an actual video on all of the different Hurricane variants, but just understand this is like the first production variant of the Hurricane. It was also armed with 8 303s, so, you know, very standard armament, very aggressive and good armament too. Then you have the L-17. Now, the L-17 is basically the MiG-21 bis, and it was designated the L-17 in Yugoslav service. So yeah, this machine would be very similar to the one that we have in the Soviet tech tree. No real difference with it at all. Then we have also the Avia Icarus BH-33E SHS, and this was a Czechoslovak-Yugoslav biplane license produced by Icarus with a total of 22 units built, and it's distinguished from the Czechoslovakian BH-33s by having a K9 engine. It had in it 2 frontal 7.92 VZ-28 machine guns, which and the machine had a practical ceiling of 8,000 meters and a top speed of 298 kilometers an hour. So not too quick, but a little bit of fun. And then the next one is a Junkers Ju-87B2. This would be a Stuka that was around. So the story behind the Stuka is interesting. Basically, in February 1945, a pilot of the Ju-87B2 of the NSGR-10 with code 5B+ER landed on a partisan airstrip due to navigation error, and the plane was quickly captured and hastily repainted with partisan markings. This Stuka flew 34 combat sorties in the hands of the Yugoslav Partisan Army for a total duration of 33 hours and 15 minutes, and during that period, 16 50-kilo bombs and 88 12-kilo bombs had been dropped onto enemy positions. Some sources say that this aircraft was used for the last time on the 28th of May 1945, attacking German forces refusing to surrender, making it the last combat sortie of the Ju-87. So technically, this could be the last Ju-87, or the last used Ju-87, obviously not the last variant. Then we have the last vehicle, which is an American vehicle, and it's a B-24J. You know, the B-24J Liberator, which, you know, if you should be at least familiar with, you know, we have a few B-24s in the game. Well, at least we have one. I know we have the PB-4Ys as well, which are based off of it. And the story of this one is there were 4 gifted ones by President Roosevelt to the exiled Kingdom of Yugoslavia. So they basically gave them over just to say, there you go, have some fun. So that is all of the stuff in the other section of the Yugoslav aviation tech tree, and hopefully you can understand why I'm splitting this into several videos. There's a lot of stuff to go over, a lot of interesting information, and, well, I look forward to part 2. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hosest Kishore, Hans, Barine, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.